Well, let's say a government or an employer asks on a form and they want to be respectful and or politically correct, which is not the same thing as respectful, and they want to, acknowledge the existence of another as being who they are and not fitting into a norm of categories. Is if they're good at what they do, what they would do is they might be a question that relates to identity of sexuality. For more the purpose, sexuality is not who you have sex with, is more like do you carry these chromosomes or these chromosomes, more like, to create a baby. Okay. And it could be people made some changes where they can't even have babies anymore in relation to a different concept, which is gender. So but they have to separate these questions. For example, do you identify as a reproductive being under these sexual categories? Now it's about reproduction, and then you could put on this question. The question about gender follows, and then gender, there could be a lot of categories to answer and choose from, including other should always be there, and I'll come back to that in a bit. But in the categories, you'd be what would be in that culture is more commonly used or accepted as particular words to use for certain categories that are defined a certain way. Now, if a person puts other, well, that government hopefully is not the only person, the only database that gets the form. It'd be the employer, and the employer would be curious if they really walk the talk of the respect part of getting to know somebody and say, what does that mean? Can you explain? And are you okay if I help others if they ask what the explanation is? And if they say yes, because they're comfortable with their own identity, because especially if they answered a question and there was a choice to not answer, which should be a choice as well, is if you want to be politically correct, you can't just think about putting all these categories that you think makes you so innovative and you don't have the category of prefer not to answer, right? Now, now, I want to say something related to the concept of gender. Uh, like for me, what's important in my social interactions is let's say conversations that are stimulating, philosophical, of quality, but also feeling heard. People that have not felt heard is they might become pretty intense about talking, but I've never maybe grown up enough to do the hard part of communication, is learn the listening skills, right? So I can offer that to somebody. But the kind of conversations I want, I have to be honest with you, certainly do not relate to gender. It's not a topic I'm interested in. And I'm a very curious person who's interested in many things. But the person I'd want to have a gender conversation with is a person that is capable of the other types of conversation that I'm really finding stimulating. So that means that person must be about more than just that subject, because if, let's say, the boss of this employer learns the gender of that person and knows it's okay to talk about how they define it, and that person could also be in a transition stage where they suddenly realize there's another term that defines them well, or they got it wrong what their term initially was in that form, is it's the job of that person, especially if they said it was okay to share, to be understood and heard and feel witnessed as who they are. It's important they share what that is and not say, well, give me that form again, right? But the thing is and that person has a right to talk and a responsibility to say, oh, I got it wrong, this is actually how I should be defining my gender. And in that workplace should be people that respect enough to kind of hear that explanation of maybe the difference. But the thing is that person, if they only want to talk about gender and less people want to talk to them, they can't say they're being discriminated against because they only want to talk about the concept of their gender that they're excited about maybe finding a better term for. Because it very likely at that later point doesn't mean that person suddenly is discriminated against because of a variation of a difference of defining a gender. It's probably because they only want to talk about that. So, there's a difference of what people should be talking about and insisting to be defined by. And people that, go do protests only for the acknowledgement that their particular label exists and matters is good. But the thing is, with what's going on in the world right now, I hope that these protests or parades or advocacy is not limited only to those rights, because at that point, with everything that's going on in the world, is they're missing the point about human rights. Because in a way, when they talk only about this, they're being disrespectful to others who are suffering sometimes in horribly cruel ways by, for example, what the pension program for that employer invests in for them to get, right? They could be investing in things where on the other side of that big city, they're having a protest against genocide. So again, there's a limit, people, about how you should ask your rights to be defended for things that fall under subcategories, because we all have the upper categories of having the same rights.